All right, so like I said, I like this topic and because I think it's so relevant to the way we live, especially when you're young. Do you remember when you were young how you were just passionate about some things? In fact, you could probably remember, if you think back to some things when you were younger that you were so passionate about that you just said, no matter whatever happens, no matter how old I get, it doesn't matter what I go through, I will never not feel this way about this, whatever thing it is in my life. You remember any of those times? Sure, and then things change, right? You grow up, you go through a difference in your life. I've got grandkids now, and one of my favorite is at a certain age, probably I'd say about 4. Both of the 4-year-olds are incredibly passionate about their own feelings, you know? And if they feel it, I mean, they are gonna let you know what they feel. And if somehow you hurt their feelings or you go against it, I mean, they're gonna give you everything they've got, including throwing themselves on the floor or, going, those are kind of the age where all of a sudden a kid might say, I'm gonna hold my breath, until I get what I want. They're just that committed and that passionate about something in their life. And just to let you know, I've said this before, my mom was the best at things like that. I remember doing that in a grocery store, and she would just be like, okay, knock yourself out, because she knew eventually I'd breathe again, that it wasn't gonna work. I was talking with my daughter, and we were talking about her 4-year-old, and she is like that, and she is just, so guided by and dealing with her emotions and her feelings that she will just, not get her way, and she will just throw herself on the floor, and she'll go through the whole thing. And I told my daughter a couple of days ago, I said, yeah, and they do that because they know this is how I get what I want. And she said, yes, but it doesn't work. You would think she would learn. I said, I know. So, because it doesn't work. Just to let you know, they just let her throw herself on the floor. And then eventually, they know that she'll come back from that. But we like passion. We like to be passionate about things. I can remember being passionate about sports, right? I can remember being passionate about certain subjects in school that I really loved. You remember those? Like recess? And, couldn't wait till that came and something like that. And of course, there's always the passion, between girls and boys that you feel, which can be a real scary thing at a certain age, but a driving thing, at a certain age where it just seems like that consumed so much of your thinking and your attention because you were attracted, to the opposite sex. It's a struggle. It's a difficult thing to deal with. When you look in the Bible, does the Bible say a lot about passion? It does, actually. It just uses different words to describe it. And it doesn't focus, maybe different than when we were at that age, on the idea that your passion is the greatest thing in life. It actually doesn't do that. It really deals a lot more with how are you gonna guide your passions? How are you gonna manage your passions and apply that part of who you are to life and to a relationship with God? There's a conference that goes on every year, started in 1997. A guy named Louis Giglio started it, called the Passion Conference. How many people, anybody here ever been to a Passion Conference? Nobody, a few hands. Anybody ever heard of the Passion Conference? So he started in 97, and his idea was he was gonna try to attract as many high school and college kids to a conference yearly to talk about a passion for a relationship with God. Just to let you know, if you wanna go to that conference, if you're over 25, the only way you can get in, even if you're paying and you have to pay to get in, is you have to be, they'll list on there, you can hold the door. So you can be a door holder. You don't even get to be a greeter, but you can hold the door if you're over 25, and you can come and you can pay attention and watch the conference. And it's a wonderful thing. In fact, if you go online, you can look on YouTube and you can find the little summary of the Passion Conference in 2025. Last year it was in Atlanta, Georgia. Next year, 2026, it's gonna be somewhere in Texas. I think it's up near Dallas. It sells out by, I'd say, 4 months before the conference, something like that. And it's a wonderful thing because they just become passionate about their relationship to God, about who He is and what He's done, and how they can follow him and how they can know him. And one of the things I like about it, I actually like Louis a lot. He's a very passionate guy. And one of the things I like about it is I was at a funeral for a guy named Steve Seelig. You wouldn't know who Steve Seelig is, but Steve Seelig was a guy who was very instrumental with Louis Giglio and getting him started doing the Passion Conference. Steve's one of those guys that will just meet you, he'll talk to you, he'll get to know you, and he'll say, you should do this. And he just sees something that you're passionate about, and he will push you toward it. And he's one of those guys that can figure out how you actually do this. How do you pull this thing off? So another lady was at his funeral. Louis Giglio was there. And another lady was there that you might have heard of. A lot of ladies have. Beth Moore. Remember Beth Moore? You know Beth Moore? Beth Moore, probably the number one Bible study teacher for 20 or 30 years in the United States. Beth Moore was one of his projects, someone that he pushed at starting this and doing this. Knew her in Houston and started her Living Proof Ministries. Well, they were both there at Steve's funeral speaking. And when Louis got up, this was the thing that I really love about the passion of Louis and Beth and Steve Seelig. Louis got up and he said, look, one year we were $100,000 in the hole after the Passion Conference. So Louis is not the best business guy. Just, okay, so so he says we're 100,000, and just to let you know, just because you're passionate about it doesn't mean, I've heard people say this, you just be passionate and God will supply the funds. Well, maybe, but you still have to kind of work with, those things. And so anyway, Steve was talking to him and knew he was 100,000 in the hole. They were at some other event, and he went over to Beth Moore. And he said, Louis is doing the Passion Conference. It was pretty early on. I mean, they hadn't been doing it for very long. He's $100,000 in the hole. Beth manages hers really well. I think her husband helps with all of that. And Beth, Louis is the one that shared this. Beth wrote him a check for $100,000 so that they would be even. Why? Because she was passionate about what Louis was passionate about, just not in the same way, just not doing the same things. There was a passion for leading people, young people, older people, as many people as possible, into a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so she was willing to do this. And it always stuck with me that she had that much compassion for him and what he was doing, even though it's not what she was doing, that she would be willing to back him up. And so here's what I want to throw out to you as we get started on this. So what happens with passion, though? What's the problem with passion? Why is it? Because it would seem like that passion would be the thing. If you could just be passionate about something and just, grasp it with both hands and say, I will never quit and never let go. Growing up, as I became a young believer, I do remember some people, maybe you've known people like this, who were just passionate about their relationship to Jesus Christ. I mean, they were just passionate about it. And years later walked away and never returned. And I thought, how can that be? How can that happen? I think that one of the struggles that we have with passions, I put some on your outline, I got a little carried away, sorry, but a few more will pop up on the screen also, is that it's short-lived and it burns out. And that's actually true about passion, because you can't live just passionately all the time. You gotta have a break. You gotta come down off of it. Kind of like our symbols on your outline, you'll burn out eventually if you're not careful. And so passion can be a struggle for a lot of people, just maintaining it and staying after it. And for most people, what happens is you'll start out passionate about something when you're young, and you'll have to move on to other things as you get older that you might become more passionate about and more caring about, because most passions are short-lived. They are. I was reading with counselors and those who study especially relationships between men and women, and they said passion in general lasts anywhere between, they're talking about, of course, a romantic passion. It lasts anywhere between a couple of days and a couple of years. And they said that's about the extent, the longest that it goes. And I thought, my wife, I don't know what she would say about that. I think I was probably more in love with her for longer than she was with me, just to let you know. Now, she probably wouldn't say that, but but I would. And I still remember she said it several times. Somebody would say, what'd you think of Steve? And she said, I just thought, he was perfect and could do no wrong. That lasted a couple of years. I still remember she'll say that every once in a while. That lasted a couple of years. Then she kind of figured it out, unfortunately, So, that's what happens. Passion kind of takes us over the bumps and the hills and the struggles. It just kind of gets us going. And because of that, it really can be a struggle and it really can burn out. Or how about this? Passion sometimes is just too youthful and sometimes it's just too self-serving. It's something that I want. It's something that I think will drive me the rest of my life. So I just want to grasp it, hold on to it, never let it go, never give up on it. And then all of a sudden as I grow up and as I get older, I kind of lose it. Or I thought about this in your outline. Just because we are passionate, it doesn't mean that we are always what? Yeah, it doesn't. But somehow it seems that way. That if I find something that I'm passionate about, that you can't say it's not right because I'm passionate about it. Joni will do this with me a lot of times. We'll talk about someone, their views, how they see something, and she will say, well, but they're so passionate about it. I think they actually believe that, even when we would disagree and say, I think they're wrong. But she would say, but they're so passionate, I think they actually believe that. I think that that's true sometimes. I think that people can become so passionate. Unfortunately, somehow we can think passion itself makes it right, so therefore we hang on to it, we won't let go of it. We try to generate or exude a sense of passion as if, therefore, you cannot challenge what I have to say or what I'm holding on to or what I'm choosing or what I'm following. And I think that can be a big mistake because passion is a reaction. It's something that you feel about it, but it doesn't necessarily justify it or make it right. When I was a teenager, I remember a song, Debbie Boone recorded a song. It became the hit song. It went forever. It was like the #1 song for the longest time, and it was so #1 for so long that once it dropped off the charts, everybody quit singing it. Nobody. Does anybody remember that song? And you light up my life. Passionate song. At one point in the song it says, it can't be wrong if it feels so. Yeah, there's the passion, right? And if it feels so right, that there's no way that it can be wrong or that you can say that it's wrong. But the problem is, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't. It's still either right or wrong. It's still either, something you should hang on to, chase, pursue, or it's not. It's either lasting or it's not lasting. Even Jesus, right? Even Jesus understood this about passion. Pops up there. Passion will attract. It will draw people. That's why Jesus is often spoken of as the one who had this passion to go to the cross. But Jesus also understood this. He understood that passion would be costly. Many times, you will pay a price for passion. But what Jesus also understood is if it's right, if it's of God, if it's a good thing, it's worth paying the price. And that's where the idea of his passion comes from, is that he was willing to chase and pay a price for something, not because it felt good or it always inspired him. In fact, many times Jesus struggled with the path that he had to walk down. If you go and read in the Gospels, you will see where Jesus is praying and he prays to the Father. He says, if it's possible, take this cup from me, I don't want to go down this road if it's possible. But he was still committed to it because he followed up with that statement, yet not my will, but what? Your will be done. Yeah, I want to follow that no matter what. So I thought I'd put a few verses in here. I'll let you, the one out of Ecclesiastes is not going to pop up, but Paul gives some instructions which I think help us kind of intro passion really well. And one is he's writing to a young guy who is running the church, and his name is Timothy. And Timothy's young, so Timothy has the struggles that a young, passionate person might have. And this is from the English Standard Version. I think that you'll like this version, and I picked it, so I'm confessing to you. I picked it because they used the word passion in here, and none of the others did. So just let you know, if you don't use the word I want, I'm not picking your translation. So here's what they say. I thought it was a real good understanding. He says to Timothy, flee youthful what? Passions and pursue righteousness. Now, is he talking about to Timothy? Is he talking about being young and things that are more sexual in nature? Not, maybe, but if you read it, you'll actually see he doesn't seem to be focusing on that. That's probably a part of it, but he's actually talking about just the way when we're young, we go after things and how that can be destructive. He says, so flee those, pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. And he actually, this comma really should not be there. It should be, and pursue peace along with those who call on the Lord with a pure heart. It have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. You know that they breed quarrels, and the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. So he's actually talking about a strategy. And what he realizes is that when you're young, there's this passion that you can have that actually can fight against the strategy that you're called to as someone who serves God. And so, Timothy, like I said, is leading a church that has started up, but it really appeals, or it should appeal to all of us in our approach to people, because we can become quarrelsome. We can fight over things. We want our opinion or how we've seen it to be the dominant opinion. And so we just get into all kind of arguments and quarrels. They're just not productive. They don't do anything. And we forget the goal, and the goal in the long run is still with the other person to be able to present something about who God himself is that will help lead them to the answers that they're looking for in Jesus Christ. But if we get in and we fight and we battle and we quarrel, we can build walls or things that prevent them. I remember a guy one time, I love this, he was in an evangelism conference. He said this, I thought it was so true. He said, between every person and Jesus Christ himself is about a dozen images that are not true. And I thought that's a great way to look at it. About a dozen images of Jesus that are not true. Things that they think about him are true and they're not. And he says, your job is to knock those down. You don't knock them down by fighting. You don't. You knock them down by not being the person that they're afraid you're going to be, and that they see you as a quarrelsome, fighting for your own way, your own opinion. You get a chance then to eliminate some of those images between them and Jesus, because the goal is for them to see Jesus as he really is, isn't it? Sure it is. I mean, that's the only thing that's gonna save them, that's gonna rescue them. It's the only thing that saved you and me and rescued us. It's not our passion for the gospel that makes the gospel right. It's the gospel that makes us passionate. We just have to make sure that our passion has some sort of control to it as we are approaching it, as we're dealing with other people. Or here's Paul, he's writing to the Romans, and you see that Paul has this deep affection for his own people, for the Jewish people, because Paul was an Israelite, and he loved them, and he actually talks about their passion. Listen, this is in Romans chapter number 10. This is the Phillips paraphrase, an older paraphrase. I've always loved it since I was a kid, and so there'll be a few words in there that you will say, who talks like that? But that's just because I'm a little bit older. This is what J.B. Phillips writes. He says, my brothers, from the bottom of my heart, I long and pray to God that Israel may be saved. This is Paul. This is what he desires. This is his great love for his own people. He says, I know from experience say this with me, what a passion, for God. What a passion for God they have. But alas, it is not a passion based on, here we go, based on what? In other words, it's not true. They've got it mixed up. They've got some things confused about who God is. It's not that they're not passionate for God. It's not that they don't want to know God or they don't want to serve God. It's just that they've gotten confused about some things. They've gotten mixed up. And so their idea, how they're pursuing, how they're chasing is wrong. So there's no correct knowledge tied to what they're doing. I think, boy, that should be a real warning for us. What happens if we chase and we go after the wrong way for the wrong things and all of a sudden say, yeah, but I'm passionate about it, so therefore my way must be the right way, must be correct. Well, it's not about whether we're passionate about it. Our passion does not justify what we do. What we do should in some way, right? Because we're trusting God, learning from God, listening to God. We understand what he's trying to do. That should justify then our passion and drive our passion. And if you want to say, well, I don't understand exactly what Paul means, which it's kind of a strange statement, he explains it. Look at what he says in the next verse. He says, they do not know God's righteousness. And all the time they go about trying to prove their own righteousness. They have the wrong attitude to receive it. For Christ means the end of the struggle for, here's his own made up word, righteousness by the law. He kind of made his own word here. Righteousness by the law for everyone who believes in him. So here's what he's saying. Here's where they get it wrong. The Jews think that it's through the law that they're made right with God. In fact, you will hear this all the time. You will hear people who say, if you go to the Old Testament, how are people made righteous in the Old Testament? They're made righteous through the law. It's not true. It's kind of frustrating when you hear people say this because you're like, have you studied the Old Testament? Have you read the Old Testament? Have you looked to the Old Testament? They're made right with God through what? Not the law, through what? Does anybody know? Through their faith, yes. They're made right with God through their faith. If you look to Abraham, it's he's declared righteous by God because Abraham believed God. He trusted God. And there was no law at that time. The law had not even been given during Abraham's time. So how would Abraham be made right through the law if the law had not even been given? No, he's made right because he believes God, he trusts God. And you see it when God says, okay, you pick up, where you are down kind of near Babylon, and that's where he lives. I want you to pick up, I want you to leave, and I'll tell you where to go. And Abraham somehow decided, okay, I believe you, I trust you, I'll pick up and I'll go. I don't know where I'm going. And God wouldn't tell him where he was going. He just said, you'll go where I tell you to go. And he followed after the leading of God. It's in trusting God and believing in God. It's our faith in God that makes us righteous. The difference in the Old Testament and the New Testament is you and I understand our faith in God is in Jesus Christ, who is the Redeemer. He is the Savior. He's actually called the Christ, which really means the anointed one, which would be more in line with a king, a ruler. He is the one that God has chosen as the one who would rescue us. They are just looking at Jesus Christ from way back here. They haven't seen what he looks like or how he's going to live. They're trusting that God has a rescuer and has a redeemer, and by their faith, they are tied to Jesus Christ. You and I have seen him. We know who he is. We're 2,000 years later, and we're putting our hope and our trust in Jesus Christ as the one who came. But it's the same Jesus who actually saves all. He's the only one that saves anyone because he is the one, the lamb, the sacrifice, the righteousness of God. And the way you're made right with God is through your faith. That's what he's talking about when he says they don't understand the righteousness of God. In other words, they don't understand what it means to be made right with God. You can't obey the law enough to be right with God. It doesn't matter how passionate you are about the law. If you try to be a good person, a lot of people try to do this. They try to be very religious and try to be a good person. Nothing wrong with being a good person. If you're a good person, I'm happy that you're a good person. You and I should be. But the reason that we're good is because of what God did for us. It's not so that by being good, we will somehow prove that we are good enough for God. We are good enough to be rescued by God. No one is good enough to be rescued by God. We can't be, because we all have sinned. As Paul says in Romans, he says, we've all sinned and we fall short of the, you know what it is? The glory of God. In other words, you know what the glory of God is? God made you for something. He made you in his image. You were made in some ways to reflect the character, the nature of God. And the closer you get to God, the more passion you have of wanting to know him and follow him, the more you reflect the character of God himself in the world. The more people see something of God living inside of you. But when we sin, we go against the character of God. We fall away, and all of us do. We all have. And so God himself is the only one then who rescues us. I love it because he's pointing out, even for us, it's possible to be passionate about being a good person and doing good things and the right things. And you should be, because God made us for good things and right things. But it's not the passion for being a good person that gets us saved or proves that we belong to him. You know why that's a good thing? Because passion, we talked about it earlier, what happens to passion? Eventually, burns out, yep. Eventually you get tired of doing it. Eventually you just kind of wear out doing good things. Anybody ever, you feel like I've gotten worn out from doing good things? Anybody? Okay, you need to work harder then, just to let you know that, okay. Yeah, but it happens because you just don't see the results a lot of times that you were hoping to see. Let me take you to one last passage as we finish up. And this is really where I wanted to jump to, because when Jesus comes, this is the struggle, because I don't think they necessarily saw Jesus as a passionate person. Jesus is a guy who just goes through life. He speaks profound things. There were a lot of people who were passionate about Jesus himself. I'm not sure how they understood Jesus as a passionate person until the cross. And then there's something about Jesus' unwillingness to give up, to stop, to quit, to not pursue, all the way to a very painful and shameful end that he pursues in order to fulfill God's purpose. And so here's what it says in Mark chapter 12. This story is actually recorded in 3 of the Gospels. And I just like Mark's version because he throws in a few details that are not in the other ones. But they all record this, and they all record this same order of things that happen. This is the story. It says in verse 13, later, the leaders sent some Pharisees and some supporters of Herod. A lot of your translations say Herodians, and Herod was just the local ruler. This is not the same Herod when Jesus was born, but Herod has kind of become a title, and so they're all named Herod after Herod the Great. And so they're supporting Herod, and they came to trap Jesus into saying something which he could be arrested for. They wanted to make sure that they got him, that they trapped him. And so they came first to try to trap him. And here's what they say, verse 14. Teacher, they said. Now I love this because they just flatter Jesus. How many of you know that, man, when you get flattered, someone talks about how wonderful you are? I know you're thinking like me. No one's ever, okay. So, but if they did, if they came and talked about how wonderful you are, how your defenses go down, and you just kind of get set up. And they knew this, and so they're doing the same thing with Jesus. They're just flattering him. We know that you are honest, how honest you are. You are impartial, man, yeah. Pumping him up, right? And you don't play favorites. You teach the way of God. What? Say the word with me. What? Truthfully, that's right. Because the Pharisees, they believed they were the bearers of truth. I mean, they were probably the most theologically correct people in their day. Now tell us this. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or shouldn't we? Well, Jesus, it says he saw through their, here's that word, their what? Hypocrisy. Yeah, he saw through their hypocrisy. And he says, why are you trying to trap me? Show me a Roman coin and I will tell you. And when they handed it to him, he said, whose picture or whose image and title are stamped on it? Caesar's, they replied. Well then, he said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and say second part with me. This is great, isn't it? And do what? And give to what belongs to. Okay, so here's how it worked back then. It kind of works that way for us. Our money is a little bit different. Ours is stamped with the image of presidents and people because our money represents the United States in a different form of government. But for them, there was an emperor, a ruler, a king. And in order for rulers or kings to understand or help you understand who they were, the money that they gave you had their image stamped on it, and usually their title, Caesar or something, or maybe the Pharaoh, his name would be on there. And they're doing it because this is what they're saying to you. The money actually belongs to me. In our country, the money is stamped with, the United States because they're the ones that back the money. But the emperor was saying the money actually belongs to me. You just get to have it for a little while. But you need to understand the money, just like you, just like everything else that you own, actually belongs to me. I can take it when I want. I can do whatever I want with it. And so Jesus is saying this with taxes. Now, if you want to get controversial, right, talk about money. Because, man, when you start talking about money, we get pretty passionate, don't we? They're trying to take my money. This is my money. What are they saying? And every one of us, I've never known anyone who doesn't get passionate whenever we get down actually to their money. In fact, a funny story. When we were young, our kids were playing sports, and one of the things you had to do was go to, I guess there were different games and things like that, and the parents would man the concessions. Anybody ever do that? Do they still do that? We had to man the concessions, and so all the moms, I was there. I think I was the only dad. I don't know how I did that. And they said, you handle the money. And I was like, no, I don't want to handle the money. Y'all handle the money. No, we'll go get everything. And you handle the money, and you're a preacher, so I know you don't want to touch beer. And so they had some kind of strange things like that. I said, I'll touch the beer. I don't. So anyway, I'm handling the money. And the way the cash drawer worked, they'd pay for it. And if it was a 20 or more, you stick it under the cash drawer. You stick it inside rather than leaving it out, I guess, so someone doesn't snatch it. And so a guy paid me, and I put the 20 underneath the cash drawer, and we just moving the money because I'm handling all the money and trying to handle everything that was sold. And all of a sudden, he's mad. I gave you 100. I'm like, whoa, what now? And so I lift up the cash drawer, and sure enough, down in there was 100. It wasn't a 20. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And I gave him another 80 on top of what I had given him back. So, and of course, as most people will do, he's like, oh, thank you. I'm so sorry to yell at you. And da-da-da. Did he do that? No, he's still yelling at me. Yeah, you're trying to steal my money, and those preachers. So when it comes to money, you got to be careful because people get really, really passionate about money. In this case, it's also politics, which we're often told don't talk about what politics or what religion. I think it'll pop up there. It is in your outline. Don't talk about politics or religion. And that, man, it's one of those subjects, but that's what Jesus got into because these are the subjects that matter in life. And so what he's saying, listen, I understand who belongs to money. So the question is, whose image has been stamped on you? And it really is a statement of who do you think owns you? Who do you think created you? Who do you think gave you life? And you may say, well, I'm free. I can do whatever I want. Right. Who made you that way? Who gave you the ability to make choices and you decide? In fact, this was actually God's idea that you would be free to decide because you don't have total freedom in everything. But within your life, you have a partial freedom. You have some freedom to choose who you're going to follow in life, which is why God does not force you to follow him. Instead, he tries to compel us. God doesn't even come after you and say, you're a bad person. I know sometimes you hear that. But actually what God does is God says, look, you struggle, you're sinful, but I rescued you. Because out of that compassion, God is hoping that you will see that the best of your life, the best thing that could ever happen to you, the best thing that you could ever become in life is to be an image bearer of the God who created you. That's it. That's the greatest thing that could happen to you. And our passion for so many other things, chasing after so many other things, gets us off track. We think, no, that's going to be the most important thing. That's going to be the most important thing. This is our lives. Yeah, it's great. But the most important thing is the God who created us and made us in his image. Not only everything you own, every idea that you have, every ability to have an idea, to make a choice, is all because of what God has done for you, how he has gifted you, how he has created you, how he has made you. And so Jesus is saying, listen, yeah, you're gonna have a loyalty to Caesar, but you better understand that the greater loyalty in your life must be, it has to be, to God himself. And that's one of those things that when you understand that, it creates a different passion in your life. Now the second story here is, I'm not gonna go through the whole thing just because it's just too long. But here's what he says down in verse number 24 at the end of his second round. This is with some of the Sadducees, and their struggle is they didn't believe in a resurrection from the dead. So they're doing a story trying to trap Jesus, a little more complicated to kind of figure out, trying to trap him into, you can't say that people are resurrected, but this is what says, what Jesus answers to them at the end of it. He says, your mistake is that you don't know the scriptures. That's your mistake. It's a knowledge thing too. You're just incorrect. You don't understand the scriptures. And then he adds to this, and you don't know, listen to this one, the what? The power of God. Yeah, if you don't know the truth about God, if you don't understand who God is, then you don't understand what God is capable of, what God can do. That's not just what he can do in the world, but what God can do in your life also, and the plans that he has for you. Because there's no way to understand and to know the power of God without knowing the story of God, the things that he's written, that he's put down, so that you would see what he has done and how he has proved himself over the years. And then there's this third instance, begins in verse 28. It says, one of the teachers of religious law, this is one of the scribes, came standing there listening to the debate. And he, listen to this is really good. This might be you. He realized that Jesus had answered, say this with me, he'd answered what? Well. Yeah, he's answered really well. And so he asked, of all the commandments then, Jesus, what is the most important? I would say this is almost like him saying, so what should you be most passionate about as far as God is concerned? You know, where should the depth of your passion, because all of these religious leaders were very passionate about keeping the law and all these aspects of the law. At one point, Jesus even accuses them. He says, you guys will tithe even the mint. You know, if you have iced tea and you got a piece of mint and you're gonna put, a little mint leaf in there, he says, you'll pinch off 10% and go take it and put it in the offering basket, right? You will tithe even the mint, but you miss the greater, the more important points of what God is trying to teach us about who he is, and you get confused in that way. He says, you don't know the power of the law the same way. And they ask him, so of all the commandments, which is the most important? Here's what Jesus said in verse 29. The most important commandment is this. Listen, O Israel. He's going back to the Old Testament law. Listen, O Israel. The Lord our God is one and only. He's the one and only Lord. There's one God. He says, and you must love the Lord your God with all your, say this with me, all your what? All your heart, all your soul, all of your mind, and all of your, what word would you conjure up to kind of describe that? You must be passionate, right? You must be passionate about God himself. He says the second is equally important. Now he doesn't give the same description for the second, but he ties it to it. He says, love your neighbor as you love who? Man, that's even more pointed, as I love me. You know how you love you and take care of you and do what's best for you? You need to learn to love your neighbor in the same way. Whoa, in another instance where Jesus does this, a guy challenges him on it. But in this case, he doesn't. He says, no other commandment is greater than these. The teacher of religious law, I love this. He replied, well said, teacher. You have spoken the truth by saying that there's only one God and there's no other. And I know it is important to love him with all my heart, all my understanding, and all my strength, and to love my neighbor as myself. This is more important than to offer all the burnt offerings and the sacrifices required by the law. Realizing how much the man understood, Jesus said to him, I like this. You are not far from the kingdom of God. After that, no one dared ask him any more questions. Yeah, he kind of figured it out, right? Here's what's most important. If you look at what he's been taught, how he's been trained as a Jewish religious leader, he should understand this. He should know this. So what Jesus is actually talking about is absolutely in line with what the Old Testament, what God has taught them, that your love for God should be the most important love in your life. With everything you have because of who he is, because of who you realize you are, you should love God. There should be a passion in your life for knowing and loving God himself. And then from that, you learn to love your neighbor the way you would take care of yourself, the way you would love yourself. Two quick little stories. I had a friend who passed away a number of years ago named Marshall Farley. And Marshall was one of those guys that was a very passionate guy. In fact, he was in outside sales. And most people I know in outside sales that do really well are very passionate people because they can come and sell you an oil gasket, and it's the greatest thing in all of the world. You have to buy a box of them. That's just what he was like. But when he became a believer, he became a follower of Jesus, they were singing the song, Amazing Grace. You know Amazing Grace? How sweet the sound. Saved a wretch like moi, right? I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now it's actually written by a guy who was a former before. He was a wretched man, and he was a slaver. He traded in slavery. He was a drunkard. He was a womanizer. And his life changed when he understood. He finally figured out who God was, what God had done for him through Jesus Christ, and it radically changed his life. It was the same thing with Marshall. And so Marshall would tell me at church all the time, I don't understand why we can't sing Amazing Grace every Sunday for every song. And I would say, okay. And then he'd say, okay, I do understand. But he was passionate about it, right? And it wasn't just because of the song. It was the song was attached to that time in his life where he surrendered to Jesus, where he realized who Jesus was. And he attached that song. And of course, he knows. I told him, I said, if we sing it every week, it'll have no impact. So this is one of the things that is true of music. It's just true of songs, is the passion of it kind of goes away and we move on to something else. But man, for him, it was the impact of it was just something imprinted on his heart and on his life. Second thing is, 2 weeks ago, I told you about Eunice Phillips. And one of my favorite stories about Eunice Phillips, who just had a passion in her latter years for a relationship to God. And one of the things I always remember is the bus driver. There was a driver who would take a bus. We rented a bus, and he'd go over and pick up all the ladies where Eunice lived. And he told me this one time. He said, when all the ladies get on and Eunice is not there, it rarely happens, but sometimes she's out of town or something. If Eunice is not there, he says it's a totally different bus than when Eunice is there. She says, they gripe, they complain. They're talking about every pain they have, how they don't like the doctors, how they don't like the government, everything you can think of. They're just going on and on and on. He said, but if Eunice is on the bus, totally different bus. And I said, so what do you mean? So do you mean like she chastises? She said, oh, no, not at all. She never chastises them. It's just she brings such a different spirit on the bus, just such a different approach when she steps on the bus and everyone sees her. They respond and they join in to the same passion that she has for Jesus Christ, and it changes everything. Listen, I think that's true of us. I'm not saying go do this and you'll change the world, but I am saying that the more passionate you are about who Jesus is and what he's done, someone will catch it. They will see something different inside of you. They may even say, hey, tell me why you see life this way. Why would you live this way? Because I don't see it the same way. And you get a chance to pass on something, a love for God himself, to someone else. Hey, let's pray. Dear Lord, we just thank you that you had a passion for us, and you sent your son Jesus into this world to prove it, to give his life, to do the things that we certainly could not do so that we would be rescued. so that we would have a different way of life and a different understanding. And Lord, as we look at that and we understand what Jesus did, how can it not make an impact on us? Except that so many times we just forget about it, or we get caught up in other things and quickly just lose the fire and the passion that we once felt. So if you're here this morning and maybe that's you, maybe when you were younger, maybe at a different time in your life, you understood something more about who Jesus was and what he did. And it really did impact you, but somehow that fire has gone out. One of the things about this kind of love for him is it grows when you're around other people who love him also. And what a great time to say, Lord, I want to know you more. I want to grow. I want to get involved in studying the Bible itself and knowing what it says. And I want to spend time with you. I want to pray and know your heart, meet with you. What a wonderful thing that I can do that. And if you're here and you've never given your heart, put your trust in Jesus Christ, then this is the time you can do that. To say, I believe you. I don't understand all of what that means. But as I look at my life and look at everything in the world, I see no other rescue, no other way out except for you. So I want to know you. I want to follow you. Forgive me for my sins. Come rebuild me. Make me into a different person. Fill me with a new spirit, your spirit. A new understanding and a new joy. In Jesus' name I pray.